Last summer, the government received some anonymous emails.
There were some anonymous mails from Swiss mail which cannot be traced. It looked like a huge, organized, professionally managed type of affair. So there was sort of a vicious attempt through anonymous mails saying these guys have now localized, recover money from them.
The emails detailed that the manufacturers of electric scooters in the country are faking bills to claim subsidies on their scooters. We don't know who sent those emails. What we do know is that they weren't ignored. The government started a probe and halted subsidies worth 1,500 crore rupees due to 12 makers of electric scooters. But how does that concern you and me? Well, the aim of subsidies was price reduction. The subsidies were part of an ambitious scheme called FAME, or Faster Adoption and Manufacturing of EVs. FAME had already completed its first phase. In 2019, it was on to its second. Thus far, FAME 2 lowered the prices of electric scooters by about 35% or up to 60,000 rupees. But FAME 2 had a catch. To be eligible for the subsidies, the EVs were to be fitted with at least 50% locally made parts like motors and controllers. The aim was to create a local ecosystem and not subsidize cheap imports from China. But for various reasons, the manufacturers did not follow the localization norm and still claimed subsidy from the government. So the government began buying vehicles from the market to dismantle them and open their hearts to inspect if EV makers did fit them with Chinese imports. In the process, subsidies for some companies were withheld and some were asked to return the same. This has led to a tussle between the companies and the government. And as of today, prices of electric scooters are up by 15% or over 20,000 rupees. So will this tussle put a spanner in the works for electric scooters? Will companies that availed of the subsidy return them or fight it out? Will prices of electric scooters come down? And will India be able to meet its EV target for 2030? Well, who better than the stakeholders to address these questions? So we have with us today Mr. Sohinder Gill, CEO Hero Electric and Director General for the Society of Manufacturers of EVs. Joining in also are Ashim Sharma, Senior Partner Nomura Research Institute, and ET's own auto expert Sharmishta Mukherjee. It's Thursday, 8th of June. From the Economic Times, I'm Kalpana Pathak, and you are listening to FAME 2, EV Subsidy Scam or Sabotage, only on the Morning Brief. While India accounts for only 7% of the global emissions, we have been proactive in managing the same. Vehicular emissions contribute to 40% of the total air pollution in India. So like the rest of the world, India too hopes that EVs will help fight air pollution, mitigate climate change, and reduce dependence on oil imports. With this in mind, in 2013, the government launched the National Electric Mobility Mission Plan to promote adoption of EVs. Since EVs cost 30 to 40% more than an internal combustion engine or ICE vehicle, the government set up FAME to promote them. The first phase of FAME was a pilot subsidy scheme worth 895 crore rupees between 2015 and 2019. In April 2019, FAME 2 was launched with a total outlay of 10,000 crore rupees, of which 2,000 crore rupees were allocated for two-wheelers. The scheme will continue till March 2024. Its focus area was to put more EVs on the road and develop charging infrastructure, among others. But COVID-19 disrupted the country's supply chain, so many companies had to look at imports to meet demand. Added to this were allegations that electric scooter makers were quoting lower prices for their scooters to avail of the subsidy. And at the same time, charging customers more by selling chargers and software separately, which actually are key components of the vehicle. And these were the big boys of EV two-wheeler game. My colleague Sharmishta Mukherjee, who has been tracking developments in the sector, gives us a lowdown on what happened.
4 companies, Ather, Ola Electric, Vida and TVS were under scanner for not providing the chargers along with the two-wheelers to the customers. So there is a cap that electric two-wheelers costing up to 1.5 lakhs can avail of incentives under FAME. So what these companies did was that they sold the two-wheeler within this price cap without the charger to customers, and the government hauled them up for this. So they are now in the process of refunding customers for the payment they had made on account of the charges. And after the process is complete, the government is going to release the entire subsidy owed to these four companies.
And why didn't they localize, Sharmishta?
So the localization criteria came in place in 2019, and the electric two-wheeler makers were supposed to have 50% of the value of the vehicle localized. It is a chicken and egg situation. The volumes were too less in the Indian market for parts makers to invest in producing parts within the country. So a lot of companies found it cheaper to import the components from elsewhere. And when COVID hit, because there was so much of disruption in the supply chain and also sales were affected around that point of time. So companies said that they had found it difficult to localize as per the initial directions given by the government, given the disruptions caused by the pandemic and also given that volumes were very less in the Indian market.
So what is the stand of the government as well as that of OEMs right now?
So the government is pretty clear that they want to support this shift to e-mobility given the goals that have been outlined by the center to reduce crude imports as well as vehicular pollution. So what the government has done is that they had entrusted the vehicle testing agencies to conduct investigations, in line with which agencies like ARAI and ICAT picked up randomly some vehicles which are on sale in the market or were on use with customers. And they stripped these vehicles down to a certain whether the components used in these vehicles have been locally sourced. Now, ICAT has recently given clean chit to 6 companies, which includes Okaya and TVS and Victory and Thukral. And these companies will now get the incentives which were held back earlier. And recovery notices have been sent to Hero Electric and Okinawa Autotech, totaling to about 249 crores. And the reports of the remaining investigations also would be released shortly. But the intent of the government is to resolve this issue as fast as possible so that the momentum which we have been seeing in the electric two-wheeler market does not get derailed.
To further the EV momentum, the government exempted EV consumers from paying road tax and registration charges. Consumers can also avail of competitive interest rates on financing of EVs. And with India being world's third largest automotive market and EV penetration growing, FAME too got the industry excited with many new players joining in. Hero Electric is one of the companies caught in the subsidy crossfire. I caught up with Sohinder Gill, CEO of Hero Electric, to seek clarities on the issues. So, Mr. Gill, what triggered the government investigation?
Unfortunately, we haven't been able to pin our focus on that, but surely we know how it happened. Like, there were some anonymous mails from Swiss mail which cannot be traced because we complained to cyber cell, etc., and it is not traced till now. So there was sort of a vicious attempt, first at Hero LO for 4 months, because we were the market leaders, through anonymous mails saying these guys have not localized, recover money from them. Like simple. And we are saying the same thing. Huh? We had not localized, we had submitted not localized. So that is the source here. It was such a vicious attempt. It looked like a huge, organized, professionally managed type of affair. And that later on dragged everybody. Earlier we thought it was war of one against another. But when everybody was dragged, then we started smelling that, oh, it's electric vehicle being hurt, electric vehicle being under fire, not only Hero. So which means what? Which means who can put the whole electric vehicles under fire? One can easily understand. Who has the interest of not making sure that electric vehicle takes off? So 2 and 2 you can add together.
There's a theory that ICE manufacturers are lobbying for an end to subsidy scheme. Are you hinting at that?
It's a sensitive topic, but now it's on the ground. I think it is very plain and clear, and we have seen the sort of signs of it. I have worked my 40 years in petrol side, so I know their psyche also. Perhaps if I was sitting in that side, I would have sensed what they are doing. These things do happen in a business rivalry or business dynamics off and on.
If I be the devil's advocate and argue that if Ather could manage 100% localization, why couldn't Hero?
Nobody is 100% localized. Even without naming the company, if you dig down, there were 4 products which were getting imported. And ultimately, those products were sort of superficially localized. That's one. So there's nothing like localization the way it should be localized. Whereas others continue to import till the time it is there. Second, to a certain extent, is again the volumes of Ather versus volumes. See, if you're doing a prototyping, if you're selling only 1,000 a month or 500 a month in those years, you can easily do localization from a prototyping basis.
So did the players go back to the government and tell them that localization is an issue instead of importing parts and fitting them in the vehicles?
Yes, from association also, there were 3 representations done immediately after 6 months and after 1 year that it is impossible to localize and there should be more time given. And they were given to Ministry of Heavy Industry, Finance Ministry, MSRT, many other departments that it is not possible to localize, amongst other difficulties also. Second is, some of the members, when they could not localize, they genuinely and factually wrote what they could and what they could not. For example, Hero particularly wrote that batteries we will not be able to localize at the time of certification and submitted the same, that we will continue to use the batteries which are technologically superior for the last 4 or 5 years we have been using. We have developed those batteries. They are imported. We are very fearful of safety. So we will continue to import. So please certify that. And those vehicles with the batteries and our submission was certified. And then for the next 3 years, we kept on getting subsidy based on that also. So that is the type of a situation which Hero is finding itself, that after 3 years, there is a recovery notice of something saying that, why did you not localize?
So would you term this as a chicken and egg situation, Mr. Gill, given on one hand, there's lack of support system in terms of component making, and on the other, there's this localization clause?
At that point of time, if you talk to Exide, Amaraja, or like Bosch, etc., the total volume of industry in 2020 was 25,000, made by 6, 7, 8 players and 7, 8 different models. It is unimaginable for people like Exide to make batteries which are different from each other at 2,000 per year. It's a half an hour production for them. So it is simply an impossible thing to expect the supply chain, which we have no control over. Like manufacturers have no control over supply chain. And the vendors had to supply those components. Batteries won't be made in-house. They're developed, researched, and then given to vendors for developing. So nobody could have done at 25,000. And next year also, it was only 43,000 industry volume. So it was sort of unimaginable to think that people would be able to localize. And also in one of the there was a parliament committee where ACMA was called and asked that, tell us the position of localization. That was after 1.5 years. And there is a noting now in the parliament committee that at that time also ACMA had said, even after 1.5 years, sorry, at these volumes, at these type of unpredictable future of EV, we will not be able to localize or invest into localization.
So how is the industry addressing the issue now?
As far as industry is concerned, so-called Big Four, Ather, TVS, Bajaj, they have been able to manage somehow a situation where they were supposed to return the subsidy, but instead they settled for a very flexible and practical solution of, okay, whatever we have overcharged, some part of it, like a small part of it, we will give back to the customer. So happy situation for the customer. They would get 2,000 rupees to 15,000 rupees, whereas these guys need not return the subsidy. For the other around 6, 7 of the players who at that point of time were the only ones existing, the other 4 were not there in those numbers. It is no solution as of now. They're still waiting for a solution of some flexibility, some practicality of fine, because the business needs money and the time is an essence. Each passing day, the business goes downhill. And perhaps the sustaining power of the business dwindles down rapidly if the solutions don't come. And it's not a small sum. It's not only recovery. Collectively, I think these 4 or 5 of the members, it's crossing 1,200 crores of money stuck for 15 months. And one is the money stuck. Second is the triggering of the money stuck with the government leading to the banks withdrawing working capital. triggering to the rating agencies downgrading you to the risky spaces. So many triggers fall in line. Ultimately, the industry or the players get throttled and the survival becomes at stake to the extent that they buckle down and perhaps agree to whatever solutions unfortunately come their way.
How is Hero Electric managing its affairs? Are you looking at raising funds?
So in my company, we have suffered heavily on the volumes. We haven't produced anything for the last 5 months now, first of all. So can business survive for zero production for last 5 months? You can understand very well. But somehow we have managed to keep the flock together. The funding, when it was dried out, the family pitched in with the money. The existing investors have got a lot of confidence. They pitched in with the money to survive. And with those funds, we have been able to manage the show till now. But how long is a matter. So while our plans are still there, we will continue to pursue those plans. For example, as soon as the situation is clear, we are surely going for an IPO, which we had declared. But it's a question of when to start, when the solution will come, and how long will it take. As far as industry is concerned, it's in a similar fate. Some of the small players will, especially startups, are going to face a hell of a time. I think some of them will succumb. And even, in fact, they are not even good shot for acquisition right now because they are such in deep trouble. And the larger ones will take a little more time to die out.
Are you planning to pay the penalty of 250 crore or are you looking at fighting it out?
There is absolutely no question of penalty. I told you 133 is a straightaway written submission, honestly, of what we did, agreed by the government. Subsidies paid out to the customers. So how in the wild imagination can you think that we would be paying that penalty, even if you label it as a penalty? Where is that penalty? I don't understand.
There are talks about subsidy being removed by FY24. And the financing remains a key issue for electric scooters. So if subsidies end, what kind of impact do you see on the segment?
I wish we would have continued with the subsidies till the time there was a confidence of the electric mobility taking off on its own. And my calculation, today we are at around 5% conversion from dirty fuel to clean fuel or electric. This is too small figure to be able to self-sustaining for exponential growth. Because, for example, Niti Aayog said 1.2 million last year. We ended up only 750,000. Niti Aayog and many others were saying, or still the target written in the website is 2.3 million this year. I think we would be better than last year, perhaps, but nowhere near to this target. Subsidies cannot last forever, surely, but it cannot be suddenly also throttled or tapered because it may end up into a fiasco situation where adoption can go drastically down. One has to be wary of it. And how long OEMs will be able to discount to an extent not to pass on the cost. But there could be other ways of doing it. If the exchequer has run out of the money, I would say, why not tax the dirty fuel vehicles then? Okay, bring the parity from their side. If the vehicles have become costlier by 30,000 or so, okay, let's increase the taxation on the dirty fuel vehicles by 30,000. So at least there will be some parity.
Would you agree, Mr. Gill, that the EV industry is not as united as the ICE industry, which may be compounding the problems for the EV makers?
I wish it was not, because there is so much on the plate. That's what I keep saying. Because when we were growing the category, we used to say there's so much on the plate for at least 10 years. There is nothing like a market share fight. Everybody can compete independent of each other. You can create your business plans and volumes of what you want to be. So let's not hurt each other. So that was a type of an attitude, and there were people together. But then there are obviously business compulsions of people who are heavily invested, or otherwise people, who want to get a quick turnaround in the industry and have an entry which can give them market leadership. So there are all sorts of formulas. And in those formulas, obviously, then these things take a beating. And the larger objective for the category goes for a 6. I wish for a category, at least, it was too infancy, too immature, and too early in the time to keep infighting rather than getting together. We would have solved it very easily if we were together. We would have talked sense with the government. We would have sat with them. We would have a great force together. We are all scattered.
The lack of unity among players has meant they could not fight together to claim their 1,500 crore rupees worth of subsidies for 15 months now. Good news, however, is that the government has decided to clear the dues by this month end. The Ministry of Heavy Industries has, however, announced a reduction in FAME 2 subsidies for electric scooters. Analysts say that the lack of subsidy support may undo the work of the last 9 years in developing an EV ecosystem, and demand may again shift towards ICE variants. As per the latest sales figures, sales of electric scooters are down to 540 units in June from over 2,000 to 3,000 units between January and May. I asked Ashim Sharma, senior partner at Nomura Research Institute, if removing the subsidy is a good option.
I think one thing is well understood, that this could not have gone on forever. If this subsidy was removed like a flick of a switch, suddenly made zero, I think the impact could have been more dramatic. But the fact that now they are first tapering it down and then removing it, probably that will give sort of two benefits. One is the impact kind of gets cushioned out. Second, the tapering down will also give the policymakers a view into what sort of an impact is it having on demand. So if the impact turns out to be more drastic than anticipated, probably a rethink may be on the cards as well. Now, because at the end of the day, while you're removing the subsidy, you also don't want that market to crash, because then whatever you have given out as subsidy in the initial years will also end up being futile. So, there is this fine balance between how much subsidy you can give and for how long, so as to ensure that some sort of a sustainable demand continues, and therefore a tapering down of subsidy that we are seeing would be happening from now on.
So in addition to doling out subsidies, what do you think India can do to strengthen its EV ecosystem?
Ecosystem is going to thrive on the three things, which is first and foremost is cost competitiveness, wherein we have rolled out incentives, subsidies, etc. But I think it's also very important for us to incentivize the coming in of technology. And the PLI scheme, etc., does that to some extent. That is through the sort of forging of tie-ups between technology leaders out there, some of whom may be in countries which do not have enough volumes, so that using that technology, things can be manufactured locally here. And that, coupled with India's scale, would be able to bring down the cost of the vehicles. Number two would be in terms of the charging infrastructure. I think range anxiety is a truth of life even now. Unless we are able to solve that, there will be a challenge in terms of mass adoption happening. And an enabling condition that would be very important is long-term regulatory roadmap being in place. So that, we don't have knee-jerk regulations coming in the face of certain events, etc., because that hamper the product development cycle. And most of these products are high capex, long gestation period. Therefore, it will be very important for us to have a long-term regulatory roadmap, even when it means transitioning from one fuel to the other, so that the incumbent ICE players can also then plan out their strategies of electrification in a smooth manner.
Last year, India imposed a 40% import tax on solar panels and a 25% tax on solar cells to discourage Chinese imports. This, even as India lacks domestic manufacturing capacity to meet demand. Consequently, solar power projects stalled, and India missed its 2022 renewable energy target by 9 gigawatts. It's important that we don't repeat the same mistake with EVs. While the investigation is still on, in hindsight, both EV manufacturers and the government could have communicated better to reach a middle ground on this issue, especially when they are both working to electrify 80% of two-wheelers and 30% of cars on Indian roads by 2030. EV's nascency needs firm policies and not ad hoc measures. Yes, subsidies aren't a long-term solution. But currently, the EV ecosystem needs all the support it can receive to meet India's larger goals of reducing air pollution, mitigating climate change, and reducing dependence on oil imports. At a time when high interest rates and inflationary pressures are impacting disposable income of households and affecting demand, a timely resolution of FAME 2 policies with a rethink on extending subsidies is crucial to ensure the efforts are not derailed now. That's it for today from me, Kalpana Pathak. You were listening to FAME 2 EV Subsidy Scam or Sabotage on the Morning Brief. A special thanks to our guests Mr. Sohinder Gill, Ashim Sharma and Sharmishta Mukherjee, and a big thanks to my colleague Arijit Barman for all his help with this episode. And of course, thank you for listening in. Sound editor for this episode was Indranil Bhattacharjee. and producer was Vinay Joshi. Executive producers Anupriya Nair, Anirban Chaudhary, and Arijit Barman. We hope you like this episode. Do share it on your social media networks. Don't forget to tune into your new episode of the Morning Brief podcast every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. It streams on Amazon Prime Music, JioSaavn, Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, and of course, ET's own audio platform, ET Play. Have a great day ahead.